Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. You will hear from industry leaders covering innovative, cutting-edge business, learning, and HR topics that weave current market research and technology into each episode. Our Excellence at Work podcast is hosted by Brandon Hall Group's Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook. I'm the host of Excellence at Work podcast and the COO of Brandon Hall Group. I am here today with Nolan Doubt from Infopro. Hi, Nolan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you with me today, and I want to just share a little bit about your background with our audience. Nolan is a Senior Vice President at Infopro Learning. He has over a decade of experience in the learning industry, helping global organizations unlock their potential of their workforce. And today we're going to be talking about creating a high impact, high performance learning solutions with AI, and also want to recognize Infopro for winning 43 awards from Brandon Hall Group, HCM Excellence Awards and Technology Awards this year, or can I say last year, because now we're in 2024. And Happy New Year, everyone, as well. So congratulations. That's outstanding. We're excited also to have you as a sponsor at our HCM Excellence Conference that is coming up next month on February 12th through the 15th. And we are going to be hearing from one of your clients, Dr. Ashwin Mehta from Bayer Corporation. So we're excited. Again, the topic is going to be similar to or continuation of what we're talking about today. And so Nolan, share a little bit about your background and how did you get started in the learning industry?
Thank you for that. And thanks for the introduction. I got started, I think, like every learning professional, most learning professionals that I've ever met. I do this podcast where I interview, and one of the first questions I ask is, where did you get started? And it seems like everybody fell into learning. And I think that's how I did as well, as I kind of fell into learning. I was working with a company that had a tech division, and that division didn't turn out to be, the tech didn't turn out to be what the market needed at that time, and so we migrated to the learning division of our company, and that's where I kind of got started, not really knowing anything about learning, and really just found it fascinating from the get-go. I think myself as kind of a I got told yesterday I'm a challenge seeker. And I think if you're like a challenge seeker, you also have to have this knack for constantly learning and trying and doing new things. And so, over the last 13, 14 years, I've done a lot of different things in learning, from sales to marketing for our clients, to building learning strategies, to launching learning management systems. So have had a quite diverse experience in this space and absolutely love it.
That's great. And, I think I love asking the question, how did you get started here? Because I'm fascinated about people's stories and background and, what makes them successful, what makes them tick. And it is fascinating, though, because when you do ask this question, especially whether it's HR or learning, usually most often people just kind of fall into it. I know I did. And I believe too, what drew me or pulled me into it was the opportunity to kind of continuously learn. And I know that's kind of hokey because we're talking about learning. But,
yeah, I know.
But it's, for me, I think early on, and this is not about me, but anyway, but I think it's for a lot of people as well, is that, you're always, unless from a very young age, you're going to be a doctor, this is exactly what you want to be when you grow up. And very few people have that, they have that DNA in them. If you do, that's wonderful. I was always very, I think I looked up or admired people that knew this is exactly
right. Their path from the
those
child.
have a lot of interest, and those interests keep changing. I think this space that we're in is it's it's phenomenal because you're always changing, you're always evolving. Even in down industries or downturns or in the recession, you find yourself, especially with technology, um, that are continuously emerging and are able to succeed and are able to forge ahead, and find the gaps or find the opportunities. And so, and I think that's what learning professionals do, right? They help people perform better. They help people identify where their gaps are, and to come out above that or be resilient.
Yeah, totally agree.
So now let's talk about AI. No one's talking about AI, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
We'll be the
but
first groundbreaking podcast, the first one to talk about AI and learning.
actually, last year when we had our conference, after the pandemic, we were one of the first to be able to have an in-person conference, and ChatGPT just came out, and not AI so much, but this generative AI.
Hmm.
That was such a different way of talking about it last year, because we were
Yes.
just trying to understand what is happening here, unless you were involved in building it,
Yeah.
with Alexa and some of these progressive technologies. So what are you finding? What are some, what's happening at InfoPro with some of your clients? And I know you have an
Yeah.
interesting framework.
So, what we got into the game really, really early. So part of our we have a learning management system, and as a part of that, we built an AI chatbot, and this was 3 years ago. This wasn't like 6 months ago, and so we had invested quite a bit into the tech component of it. Of how do we get a AI to answer questions better, all with this idea of like, can we lower the cost to serve our learners? Because that's part of learning is how do we do more with less. And so we said, how can we shrink the cost to serve these learners and remove the questions that everybody gets asked, and how also do we deliver a better learning experience to these people using AI? So we started kind of on the front end of it, but then a couple, a year or so later, um, when generative AI, with ChatGPT and the like, became more hardened and a little bit more mature, we invested in that tech really early internally. As a company, where, for those that don't know, we're a consulting company, a services company, and so we design, develop, and create training programs for many organizations. I think the 40 plus awards that we won for Brandon Hall are all about the learning experiences and learning things that we have done for our clients. So most of our cost internally is production, creating these assets, doing these things. And so for us, we had a really vested interest in finding a way to use generative AI and AI in general to shrink our own cost, and to make our costs go down and our speed go up, and obviously along the way keep the value there and the performance and everything like that. So we sunk a lot of cost into research and development internally at the direction of our CEO, who goes out and now he goes and speaks to other organizations who are looking to kind of establish that. But we first tested it in house, and we righted it, and we found a way. We were able to save about 30% of our cost, and develop much faster using a lot of tools. But then when we realized that as we started pushing this out to some of our clients and consulting with them on how to use that, we needed a way to, I guess, formalize AI a little bit more, because they don't have the huge production houses maybe that we might. And so we created something, that we call the intelligent design framework, which all it really is we've taken a model that most people understand. Maybe some might say it's dated, but it's still relevant, is ADDIE. And we said, okay, along this ADDIE framework, where are we injecting AI to make our jobs easier, to make this, lower cost, whatever it should be. And so we created that model, and that's where we're consulting with a lot of our clients today, is just how might we leverage AI in your learning and development organizations, or how can we help you if you want to partner with us on that to bring you tremendous and speed and money. And so like that, I think that, and that's right where we are, right? We've had a handful of clients, maybe 10 or so, who have invested with us and have said, yes, help me make this transformation. But for us, the transformation really started internally because of a huge potential, right? To actually pass along the cost savings and things like that to our clients.
Sure, and to be able to access information quicker and the right information, because for if you're a learning professional or in the learning space, it's not necessarily you don't have a lot of content. It's being able to decipher through all the content and to make it available and to make sure it's relevant. And that's the biggest challenge that, and it still continues to be, but it's with AI, and why don't you you know provide your perspective? Like, how do
Yeah,
we
that
do
what
this?
you said is a really interesting revelation of, because you said, there's access to information, um, but how do you discern that and shrink that into something like digestible? What we ended up finding, I mean, in turn, because the first use of AI for us was just like, let's call it simple things. So right now we're in this podcast. There's obviously AI tools that can make this podcast translated into Japanese or Spanish or French. And for global organizations that we work with, we used to have to pay a translation service to do that. But now AI can do that, and it does it incredibly fast and a lot less expensive. So translation cost goes down. Other really simple things like finding the right images used to take forever, right? How do I get the right image for this training program? Well, AI can generate an image for the training program. And if we find a image that we like and we need to scrub the background, it used to take us an hour. Now it only takes us 5 minutes because AI is much better at scrubbing the background than we ever are. Video production, all this like very nuts and bolts stuff is where we started. But as we pushed into our clients, the biggest value add was exactly what you talked about, which is we kind of simplified it down into, say, reducing SME time, because getting access to subject matters remains the bottleneck for most organizations and most clients that we work with. That becomes one of their biggest bottlenecks, is how do we get this information out of this subject matter expert? And so, and obviously when you're just doing this internally, you don't really have that as a as a barrier. But that one has become crucial. And so some of the things that we've done and piloted with organizations is, let's take interviews like this where you ask a SME a question. And obviously you would do this anyways, but the difference is when you inject AI into this type of a conversation, the transcript now automatically gets pulled and it gets saved in a database. So as you start pinging, okay, give me the answer to this, it's going to go and search the entire text of this conversation for the answer. It can search every email from the SME to us, every Word document, every product demonstration, every webinar this person has ever done, without me having to sit through the webinar, read the product demonstration, and find the answer and relevate it to that text. And that's become incredibly powerful. That is, as you mentioned, that has become, I think, the superpower of AI in learning.
It helps also having to cut down on the um, the focus on tagging and
Yeah.
making sure that you're tagging and mega tagging it correctly, because even the best, and we find this ourselves too within our research center, making sure, but then if you tag too much, then it pulls everything that's not necessarily relevant. But if you don't tag enough, then it doesn't come up in the search engine. So that's always been one of the biggest challenges, I think, for content.
Yeah, and that's So where we help companies with that,
Mhm.
you know, one of the biggest barriers to AI today is really getting your head around the security of it all. Um, and so one of the things that we do, and biggest service that we can provide for a lot of organizations is to say, the way that generative AI works today, it's like a public library. You go and you check out a book,
Mhm.
you put the book back in, but the information that's there is there for everybody to have. And as more books get added to that library, you can't, you only rent the information. That information lives there forever. What we
Mhm.
do with organizations is we say, let us copy and paste that library, right? Which is essentially is like, let us copy and paste the internet into your own library, into the library of Infopro Learning. So now we still can check things in and out, but we can put in our own version of the truth into this library where nobody else has access to it. So, because there's a big security concern when you start talking about, okay, if Joan is the subject matter expert of nanotechnology for IBM, we don't want her thought leadership just out there for the world to see. We need it locked inside of just IBM's network and IBM's library. So the first step is like, how do we lock down this knowledge that we're getting from these people? Then comes in with generative AI, you're not really tagging anything, but it's more about how do you ask the right question. This is called prompt engineering. That's the fancy word they named for it, which is like what is the question that you ask to get the answer that you need. And that's what takes a lot of work and a lot of fine tuning with our clients is how do we create this engine that when you ask it a question, it can actually provide a highly contextual and relevant answer um, to the learners. And that's really that fine tuning of the question, the type of content you put in becomes where the legwork is.
Right. And do you, you mentioned the, creating content and also the concerns with the risk and the
Yeah.
ethical, um, there's just not enough legislation yet, right, on it. So what do you see, as being in the learning industry? And, there's been a lot of trends and a lot of, the technology disrupts the process and the
hmm
workflow. So what do you anticipate, and do you see that legislation that there will be more parameters or things that we need to be concerned with?
I don't think it's going to impact L&D much. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think I think um, the legislation that will come down will be less involved, and I think we're fairly isolated in the L&D space, as well as like any other, sort of like marketing or sales or whatever it is. Um, I think we'll be fairly well protected because the more ethical concerns are actually intrinsic to the company that you work with, right? And ethical than legal concerns really come down to yourself. Like the IBM example I mentioned, right? Um, uh, there's security risks of IBM of letting access to this, AI tool that we built for IBM. That's a huge risk for them. So it's actually more in the company, more on IBM to make sure that they've trapped their own knowledge in the right way. Not because if the knowledge got out, particularly in the learning space, not if the knowledge got out, it would have some great impact, but it would steal their competition and it would take away their competitive advantage. And then comes like the internal idea of is it really impacts like people's jobs and people's well-being and people's intellectual property as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have an incredibly intelligent head of leadership and organizational development in our company. His name is Dan Russ, and he's written many books and this, that, and the other. And like the idea of, could we take everything in his brain put it into our tool and ask it a question and get the same answer, are we now stealing Dan's IP because we created an AI bot to replicate Dan that can work 24/7 and give an answer immediately? Those are really moral questions that I think legislation, possibly we've seen some of this play out in Hollywood, right, with the
Mhm.
IP of screenwriters and actors and things like that. Um, I think again it will come down to a lot of um, companies actually having to decide how they want to manage it, particularly in the L&D versus really government legislation pushing anything down. Again, with the one possible notable exception is like protecting the personal IP and how does somebody take that with them when they leave?
Sure. I see more companies trying to create these assistants or assistant
Hmm.
um, in like a type of robotic,
Yeah,
not where you'll have someone next to you and some kind of design and they'll be able to help you or assist you in your job and even in the hospitality industry,
yeah.
having when you go and check in and so that it'll be interesting because I think we're going to be interacting more with these type of devices um, within the next decade or so. It'll the
And
experience will be a lot different.
and
The way that
it's an interesting thing because the market is so volatile and so incredibly hard to predict,
Mhm.
right? I remember yeah, over a decade ago, there was a conversation about whether McDonald's would ever use AI to as line cooks,
Mm.
because they're a production shop and blah, blah, blah. And they said, and McDonald's, internal people would say, pretty much said like no, because the cost of labor is still a lot lower than the cost of having to fix these machines. But as the cost of labor, at least around here, has doubled, when
Mm.
I started working in Idaho, my minimum wage was $6 an hour. McDonald's that I drove by is starting at 15 an hour. The
Same in
cost of
Florida.
that, yeah, so the
Yeah.
cost of that labor has tripled, which has actually made way for the economies of automation to be more worth it. And
Hmm.
so, but this is not a new thing for our country or for the world, right? We still have postmen, we still have delivery people, despite there being email. you know, there is never there's always a short disruption followed by the new norm, and I think this disruption is possibly as big as one as we've ever seen. But I think the new norm has a way to find right itself.
Right. And there'll be a need for people in different
Absolutely.
roles. I think short term, there may be, a larger gap between
Mm-hmm.
um, the working class and those that have more skills. So I think that will be a challenge that we need to anticipate and figure out. How do we reskill and how do we educate this larger group that may not have the traditional skills, and we do see companies that are starting to outreach in these communities to help, attract different types of talent that may not be a certain pedigree or have a certain education. So that will open doors to a larger population that, could be a potential.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's also a great leveler, right?
mhm,
Because I now, like, granted, I've always, my job before was in writing content, so I could always write good content. But, my brother, who's a high school football coach, he can now write relatively the same good amount of blog content as I can.
mhm,
It's a great leveler in many ways. I think we look at it, I think a lot of times we tend to look at the negative aspects of it and the fears of, well, isn't this going to take away my job and isn't this going to do it? But it also provides opportunities for those that didn't have a skill or the knowledge to do it, because now it's kind of removed that barrier, right? So if you can't afford college and you can't become a software engineer, well, now you can code using AI. So
Sure.
and that's why I think the market is so tough to pin down. And with AI, it's interesting to see where it will level itself out.
Right. And with education as well, there's so many different ways that you can educate yourself, and you can take master classes. You can
Yeah.
become a certain uh, professional or
Mm-hmm.
skilled at, whether it's for a hobby or for the workplace. There's so many different opportunities that you have.
Totally.
Nolan, well, I'm excited about your team being at our conference in a few weeks here, and continuing this conversation, and also learning from Bayer, Dr. Ashwin, about his success stories or their success stories. Before we wrap up today, is there anything that you want to share?
Yeah, first we just want to thank Brandon Hall. The conference last year was absolutely fantastic. We're
Thank you.
incredibly excited to see what you've done. I don't know if you'll ever be able to top just how busy and the buzz of last year, because you were one of the first to come back and it was such an electric conference. So I'm excited to see this year. I hope everybody goes. I'm sure it's going to be equally good. Encourage everybody to go check it out. It is one of the top conferences, I believe, and I go to a lot. So I definitely would check out Brandon Hall. Great peer learning there, and definitely Dr. Ashwin. I've met him many times. An incredibly fascinating gentleman. If you have the chance, he loves to educate people. If you go to a session or don't go to a session, you want to just run into him in the halls and talk to him. Fascinating individual. The last thing I'll leave you with is if you are in the ideation phase of AI, or they're in the maturity stage of using AI and L&D, I'd love to partner with you and love to find a way. We continually are looking for pilots and for organizations looking to take those steps and helping them pioneer the use of AI in their organization in a safe way, in a moral way, in an ethical way. So please do feel free to reach out to us if what we've talked about today is something you want to explore deeper.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Nolan. And thank you, everyone, for listening in. And have a great weekend. Have a great rest of January as we move into the year here. Happy New Year, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.